So, welcome to another Arts and Nature Social Club Salon. Many thanks for switching on and joining us, given that a lot of us these days are probably a little bit tired of many Zoom calls. Special welcome also to friends and contacts in the US. It's great that you're able to make it. Some of you know Lisa, some of you know me. Just as a brief intro, what is the Arts and Nature Social Club? Arts and Nature Social Club is a relatively new members club with a focus on, as the name suggests, arts and the sciences, with nature as an underlying topic. And our goal is really to have a strong impact, not only in Berlin, but globally. Our vision and mission is really to become a Rotary club of purpose with a focus on arts and nature. The arts component really to address the emotional side of sustainability, because myself, I've worked in sustainability for around 50 years, and I can say from my own experience that it doesn't always help to address people's minds only. So we are trying to bring together both aspects during our big salons that happen in collaboration with the Club of Rome. We also have music and arts discussions, etc. And for those of you in Berlin, feel free to stop by once we are able to again to meet in person here in Berlin. And not to forget, our physical host here is the Hotel de Rome, where our meetings usually happen. A very nice space. It feels a bit lonely without the audience in the background, but great nevertheless that at least the three of us are able to be here together in person. So the theme, a very relevant one and timely, focuses on the US elections 2020 and its implications for the first 20th century democracy, with a particular focus also on social media and media in general, the digital aspect of the elections. And Lisa Witter is our expert on let's say government and education, and she'll say a bit more about her background. Just in brief, Lisa was born in the US on the West Coast, has been Berlin based for quite a while now, is an executive, former public servant, serial entrepreneur, writer and public speaker, and also political commentator. And Wolfgang Gründinger, he is a lobbyist in the realm of digitalization. He also works for the German army on digitalization issues and has had a long track record also in terms of writing books, often with a focus on intergenerational justice. And both of them will also draw the line between their background and their respective angles on the topic. Myself, my name is Jörg Geier, and I'm on the advisory board of the Arts and Nature Social Club, and also responsible for programs. And I look forward to the next hour or so discussing the US and the US elections, which is a topic dear to my heart because I spent 7 years in the US, especially the San Francisco Bay Area. So this election has certainly also had an impact on me emotionally, to say the least. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Lisa, who will give us an introduction on the elections and give us her perspective.
Well, warm welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. I will say I really like the setting of the arts and nature for this conversation. During lockdown here in Berlin, my family and I were up in Uckerland, which for those in Germany know, it's a beautiful, they call it the Tuscany of Germany, up there. And I would go for long walks in nature. And I realized two things as I was doing that. Number one, how much I miss nature. I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest, and I've got sort of water and mountains and volcanoes and deserts and rainforest in my blood. and just also how much I miss politics. So I'm the co-founder of something called Apolitical. We're a peer-to-peer learning platform for people in government. I'm really focused on career civil servants, but my background has been at the intersection of politics and policy, and I'll do a great reveal at the end about an announcement I have around politics. But what I thought I would do just to set the scene so that Wolfgang and I can get going is create sort of what's been going on in the US by the numbers. So I'm going to give you a kind of a statistical sort of arc of the election itself, or the campaign, then the election, and then where we're at right now. Now, just for a little bit of context about me, anyone that calls themselves a political expert is a little bit full of it, because God, you know, so much of this is irrational, but I have been involved in 6 presidential cycles, spent time everywhere from New Hampshire at the primaries all the way down to, I was a political pundit for many years on Fox and MSNBC, doing this election analysis. I actually quit doing it though, because it became so polarized, just to what you're going to talk about, that I felt like people couldn't hear one another. So I have some of that experience. On this cycle, because I'm living in Germany, I had less to do directly with the campaigns, but much more with an informal group I helped form called Progress with Friends, where many folks are now in positions in the United States working on the election. And then business leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, who've been very active. So I'm going to bring you some of that. So by the numbers, here we go. So 29, that's my first number. That's how many notable Democrats were in the field going into the primary, and Biden made it through. Why did he make it through? Well, number one, he had the highest name ID, or one of the highest name IDs. Remember, when primary voters go to vote, they vote for people that sound familiar. This guy was, he's been in politics for 47 years, 8 of them as vice president. He had a bit of a Obama bump because of that, that time with him. And I think it's really important to remember that most Democrats are quite moderate. Let me just give you the numbers. Of the United States, 24% of Americans call themselves liberal, 38 consider themselves moderate. Those broke 64% for Biden. So it's those moderate voters who really swung, and 38 conservative. And those conservatives are getting more conservative, actually. They're not getting more. Let's talk about money in the election. So we have 29, 38 with money. This was a record-breaking year for campaigning. The Democrats outspent, everyone says, oh, Democrats don't have the money. The Democrats outspent the Republicans, $6.9 billion by the Democrats, $3.8 billion for the Republicans. That's not counting 2 major billionaires who ran on the Democrats, Bloomberg and Steyer. That's not counting their money. I think it's really important to note that the percentage, they've done analysis that money donated to campaigns, the large checks are going up, small checks are about holding the same. Less than 0.2% of Americans gave over $200. So the money that's coming in is quite big, and they tend to be more on the extreme side. So the extreme is extreme right or extreme left, which is some of the reasons why the campaign has the rhetoric that it does. It's the donors behind it that do. Now, let me talk about how important the money is in these races. So congressional races raise a lot of money too. And when you're a Democrat or Republican, you get to Washington. Wolf, how many hours a week do the party suggest you raise money? How many hours a week should you be raising money if a Democrat or Republican?
20.
30 hours a week.
30 hours, wow.
Just think of that, 30 hours a week, wow. That's how much. So I bring up this money in the campaign because it's related to what's going on with democracy. So we'll come back to that. Now I want to go to the vote. Okay, that's the Biden made it through, pretty moderate, got a bump, more money than ever through. The vote itself, 67%, super high voter turnout, highest in 100 years, but that's still 1 in 4 Americans not voting, either disenfranchised or chose not to vote. So it's a great number, but it's definitely not 100%. Wolf, you and I were talking, this was a young people's election, so they turned out in great numbers, historic numbers, 18 to 29. I'm gonna get to in the demographics of how that's changing. And mail-in ballots really are a big game changer, obviously because of the pandemic, but that trend's been going on for quite some time. Biden won by around 4.4 million votes, but still Trump got more than any other elected president in the world has. Biden beat him. So this was a campaign about turnout that worked very well. Let me tell you quickly how voters broke. Education, never attended college, voted for Trump. If you had a bachelor's degree, broke for Biden. The big spread was for advanced degrees. So if you had a master's degree or above, 62% of those people. So there's an education gap here. Location, urban, which is only 30% of the population, 60% went for Biden. Suburban split. So those suburban moms split a little bit more for Biden, and the rural areas, 57% went. So there's that, you've all heard of this rural city divide. Income, if you made over $200,000, 44% for both. So very rich people, not the billionaire rich that we have in America, but they split. Lower income went for Biden, about the middle split. Gender, more for Trump, 57% female for Biden. Race, 58% for Trump. Non-white people, 71% for Biden. We'll talk about that demographic. Issues that really drove people, number one issue was the economy. If that was your number one issue, 83% went for Trump. So this is quite important in a time of COVID. Racial inequality was the second one. 92% of those people went for Biden. Corona was only 17% of what people said it was most important, 81% Biden. So clearly this was a mandate against Trump's handling of COVID if you were a swing voter. And then healthcare, 62% Biden. Crime was up there too. Climate, I know this is something very important to all of us. 67% say it's a serious problem. And if you said it was a serious problem, you voted for Biden at 70%. So this is definitely a mandate. Important to note, though, that where those swing districts voted for Biden down ballot, so in congressional races or below, they went Republican. So it wasn't a blue sweep. It was definitely a blue at the top and Republican down. Now, this is important for actually legislating and how we draw our electoral maps. We just did a census, so there'll be something called, we have to do redistricting, which is something called gerrymandering, which makes a big difference. So we can come back to that in the analysis. Okay, the last bit I want to talk about, so we talked about the election, the vote itself, the campaign, the vote, now the transition. We're obviously in steady hands with Joe. He's been there for 47 years. Really strong on foreign policy and domestic issues. He's got to put 4,000 people into jobs, and 1,200 of them need to be approved by the Senate. Now, the Democrats didn't win the Senate. We have a runoff race coming in Georgia. We'll see what happens there. 3 main issues he's focusing on out of the gates: healthcare, the economy, and COVID. I would say COVID, the economy, and healthcare in that order. But as you know, Democrats have a very, very wide remit. So there are 41 special groups listed on his website. They're all going to want something from him, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he handles that coalition. He's calling for big infrastructure spending like FDR, so lots of domestic focus. I know we want to get to foreign policy, but there's going to be a lot of domestic focus making that work. A couple demographic trends. By the end of this year, a majority of Americans under 18 will be non-white. Super important to understand the country going forward. That's not going to change. Your issue polarization. 72% of respondents in 1958 told posters that political affiliation was important to who their child married. 78. Today, that's around 62% of US Americans of both parties would prefer their children married someone from the same political party. Let me rephrase that. They care more, we used to care more about race, and now we care more about political parties in America, which is quite fascinating. So America's slipping in democracy. I want to talk about that as we get into it and how that might spread over here. Outsized impact of social media, which you're going to talk about. The election was for Republicans about the context money, and I'd love to talk about rational Trump voters. Europeans are like, how could anyone vote for Trump? There are a lot of rational Trump voters. And I would say the majority of Americans are exhausted. They estimate, More in Common estimates that 67% of Americans are actually the exhausted majority who are tired of the fighting, but we have this polarized world. Not only, but in part because of social media. So those are by the numbers how the election went.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And now over to Wolfgang, who will tell us a bit about himself and give us an insight about media and especially social media and the impact it has on the elections.
Hello, my name is Wolfgang, and thank you, Lisa, for the intro, because I'm spending way too much time on Twitter. And as someone who works on digital ethics and on social media and their role for our democracy, it's always interesting to follow all the Twitter experts. Like number one day after COVID, there is just thousands and thousands of pandemic experts out there. Number one day after the election, there is so many experts on Twitter. All of a sudden, I don't know where they come from, but it's refreshing to hear from an actual expert so many statistics on that election. And when I lived in the US, in California also, in Santa Cruz, I just had a Zoom call before the election with a friend of mine who still lives there. And I asked him about the election, obviously, because I was interested on an insider view of an American there. And he answered, well, I'm very much convinced that Biden is going to win this election by a landslide. Why? Because just look at Trump, just look at the facts, just look at the president Biden is running against. This is a racist, sexist, authoritarian liar. And his lies have been debunked. He is demystified. So people would vote for Biden and he will win by a landslide. Indeed, he won eventually, but margins have in the first not very, very significant. And still, as you said, Trump has still collected more votes in the popular vote than in the last election, 2016, and 70 million voters for Trump. That is going to be explained. We have to wonder why this happened, what happened, and what people think. And you said they are not irrational. So I think also they might be rational and have their reasons to vote for Trump. So it's a very big and common misunderstanding that racism, authoritarianism, and chauvinism are somehow unpopular because there is many people out there who are racist, who are authoritarian, and who are chauvinists. And it's also another big misunderstanding to believe that once a liar has been debunked, he's going to be demystified and people will just stop believing him. They don't believe the lies because they don't know it better. They believe the lies because they want to believe the lies. They don't care about the facts. And this is why I adopt the fact-checking. I think fact-checking is very important when it comes to Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or the social media. But fact-checking is way overrated on its real impact because people just don't want to believe the facts and make up their own truth. So right extremists, they don't get demystified, as I said, when they are in power. In Germany, you often think the AfD entzaubert sich selbst. So when people who are right-wing are in power, they just, they create chaos, they create polarization, and people will realize very soon that next time they don't vote for them anymore. No, that's not the fact. Trump has even won more voters and grew his power during his presidency, not the opposite, as we tend to believe too many times. So then why did he win? Many people blame social media for the rise of Trumpism, be it in the US or be it the right extremists in Germany and elsewhere. Because both things happen at the same time, right? So there is Facebook and Twitter coming up. At the same time, there's this new wave of right extremism and right populism that we can explain somehow. So Twitter and Facebook, they would manipulate the people with dark ads, with fake news, with lies, and with their invisible algorithms. But that is too simple. And it's eventually also even wrong. Already 4 years ago, after the 2016 election, when Trump won by surprise, many people made Facebook responsible for his victory. Why? Because he hired a very shady British firm named Cambridge Analytica, and they ran dark ads on Facebook. And those dark ads, dark meaning micro-targeted and not being very transparent, they would manipulate people somehow into voting for something they actually don't want to vote for. But I have my doubts about that. And after 3 years of investigation by the British data protection authorities, they found out that this shady people from Cambridge Analytica, they were rather barkers but didn't really bite. So they were just big mouths in, oh, we can manipulate. They were big marketeers, but they didn't really have an impact. What data rather show is Trump supporters, they didn't use social media a lot. They watch Fox News on classic traditional television. Young people, on the other hand, they are almost 24/7 online. They use Facebook, they use Instagram, they use YouTube, and so forth. But young people, they voted for Biden. Old people who didn't use social media that much, they voted for Trump. That's a difference. It would be the contrary result if social media had such a big impact. Then other people say, well, isn't there this filter bubble around? So isn't there this filter bubble on Facebook or in Twitter where people just see what they want to see? No. The filter bubble existed before. And actually on social media, be it Twitter, be it Facebook, be it any other channel of social media, it's easier to see the other bubble. Like I'm seeing Trump's tweets every day because he's being retweeted or commented, even negatively commented, but still his message still gets transported by a retweet, by a comment, and be it negative. The original message still gets transported. When New York Times or when CNN or any other channel or newspaper report about Donald Trump, then they also transport his message and they make him more popular. They make him known. So it's rather a filter clash that we experience rather than a filter bubble. Yes, what is true is that fake news gets spread easier and faster online than real news, than real facts. But this is only when big media houses, like traditional newspapers and their online outlets, or like TV news channels, be it Fox News or CNN or others, jump on the wagon and report about them. If there is headlines about Trump, then they also transport his message, and be it negative, as I said. So what we must acknowledge to tackle that issue of democracy in the 21st century and of fighting populism in the 21st century is to acknowledge that many people voted for Trump because they genuinely liked what he was saying and doing. And also Biden presidency is not a reset button back to a past of harmony, the past before Trump or the past before social media, because that harmonious past never existed. Sure, we have to carefully observe what happens on Facebook and on Twitter, on YouTube and on TikTok. And we need to regulate social media in a smart way. Sure, we also need more education to protect people against propaganda. Sure, we also will talk about that, I think. The US needs a reform of its unfair election system. You talked about gerrymandering. We might talk about the Electoral College. Yeah. We could talk also about the registration to voting, which doesn't exist in any other country I know of. But above all, the most important yet also most difficult task is to fight back against the enemies of freedom. We must understand that these people are there, that they organize, that they also use social media to organize, and that those people don't care about the truth. They don't care about the facts, and they don't care about fact-checking. We must no longer look away, as we've done in the past, saying, oh, Donald Trump, he's a clown, he's never going to win. No, we can no longer look away. No longer talk them down. No longer let them hack our democratic system, which is made, for instance, the responsibility or the ethics for journalists or for the press is set to be neutral, to be distant, to be weighted between the poles, like pole 1 and pole 2. But no, this is being hacked by the enemies of freedom that hack the media and the media system and our freedoms that are meant to protect the freedom, but they hack the system that is protecting the freedom. So no more excuses, no more appeasements, not on social media and also not elsewhere. Happy to discuss that.
Yeah, let's go.
Thank you very much. You're welcome to raise your questions online as well, please, and we'll try to pass on those questions to our discussants. First question goes to Wolfgang. You talked about a filter clash and also mentioned or referred to propaganda. Needless to say, that's a very charged word, especially in Germany. So can you maybe draw a line between propaganda over the decades and propaganda as we see today? And I'd also like to refer to Adam Curtis, BBC documentarian, who did a series on British television called The Century of the Self, when he described the rise of the PR movement. In 2005, he did that actually, the rise of the PR movement and how PR, public relations, was introduced to the area of politics, mainly actually by left-leaning governments, namely the Clinton administration, and later under Tony Blair, the new Labour Party in the UK, or the Labour Party under kind of the new Labour rule. So maybe just talk a bit more on that and also refer that to what you call the filter clash.
Okay,
by the way, no one would call the Clinton administration a left-leaning government anymore, but I just wanted to jump in
from a US perspective.
Well, yeah, I think like the spectrum of what is left and liberal in the US and what is left and liberal in Europe is way different anyways.
Yeah.
You might be talking about that later as well. So what do I mean by saying propaganda? I said propaganda because I don't want to use the word fake news too much, because fake news today has grown to be like everything. Fake news was first coined a few years ago when the spokesperson of Trump said, well, we don't believe that, we have our own news. So it's alternative facts, so to speak. And then Trump used the term to describe all other media than the ones who love him as fake news, fake media. So we shouldn't really use that term because it's misleading. And it's charged by the enemies of freedom. So it's against the free press. So I'm skeptical when it comes to using the term fake news because it's disinformation, it's lies. And so I want to call it disinformation and lies. And if you want to go a step further, let's call it propaganda because it is telling people not the truth, it's telling people the lies to build an own story, to bolster your own political worldview, and eventually to turn the political system in a direction where you benefit, and not only in a way of earning a few more percentage points on the scale in the polls, or maybe in election results, but to actually abolish the system of free election and of free press. So, and if that is your goal, and I'm very convinced that it was Donald Trump's goal, because he said it very bluntly, very often, including not only his calling the free press the enemy of the people, not only his open sympathy to extremist violence, not only his open sympathy to people who have weapons, who have guns, and calling them to stand back and stand by, and to call the election a fraud. If this is your goal, to discredit democracy and freedom itself, then I'm very much in favor of calling disinformation not only very neutral disinformation, but to call it propaganda, being aware that this term might be charged. And then the second point you mentioned is about the filter clash. Yeah, there has been this famous book by Eli Pariser called The Filter, or titled The Filter Bubble, but not Pariser and not anyone else that I know of has ever found scientific evidence for the existence of the social media filter bubble. There is many studies around from different European countries, from the US, covering different platforms, be it Twitter, or be it Facebook, or be it any other social media, where scientists could not find the filter bubble. The very opposite is true, because as I tried to explain beforehand, you rather come into contact with other opinions on Facebook. Like many of my friends that I don't meet so often in real life, who have crazy opinions that I see on Facebook. And if I comment on something on Facebook, then the reaction goes again back to me, and I can have a dialogue on social media on different opinions that are more and more polarized, because we all of a sudden understand that people indeed exist who have other opinions. Before social media, before the internet, I was in my own little field. What happened, however, with the social media being everywhere by now, is that small groups can organize. Like early on, those who are extremists, who have particular views of society, they have been quite alone. They've been quite lonely in their little filter bubble. But now those people, they organize. And that's the danger. And then there is messenger services like Telegram, not so much WhatsApp anymore because they got more and more restricted. But Telegram services, like the ones that have been started by different like artists and cooks here in Germany, like Michael Wendler or like Attila Hildmann and others. And so that is dangerous, that fake news gets spread faster, but social media itself is accelerating the pace, but it's not changing the very basics of democracy in this regard.
Can I just mention PR?
Yeah,
it's such an interesting point. I mean, Trump understands PR maybe better than any president we've ever known. And the reason why he says outrageous things is because we in the mainstream media talk about it. So he has played the PR game like no one. And I can't pretend to know what's in his head or her, whatever, but he knows how to get people talking. He has had Fox News as his outlet, Twitter, everyone retweets him. Like, we fed the machine, right? He was a machine, and he fed it very much. But I want to go back to a little bit. Wolfgang, I don't think you're saying that all of the 71 million voters for Trump voted because they agree with his propaganda. I think it's quite fair to say that many of them didn't, but they excused his ridiculousness for other reasons. So if I could just outline, there's some interesting sort of rational Trump voters. Number one, Trump reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. 56% of those gains went to top earners in the corporate sector. They're very happy. They don't want that stuff to go away. They can excuse his games if they are. They're not real, separating kids at the border, but a lot of people think it's antics and not real. Again, I'm not defending it at all. So those guys. There's folks who are watching the stock market, as I said, go up and up. So these are market Trump fans. High wage earners got their money in the stock market. There's a rally going on, right? Like, so it's, why would you vote against that? Entrepreneurs, 65% of entrepreneurs in America said that they liked Trump. It's great conditions to be an entrepreneur. And a lot of Latinos see themselves as entrepreneurs. It's part of the reason why the Latinos, and this is a trend going, are breaking very much. Now, there are these low-wage workers that are losing their jobs or think they're losing their jobs to immigration, more think than they are, but think they are. President Trump, in the first 2 years, had 400 executive orders to protect the job. So if you're losing your job and some guy has tried to come out and support you, these are all rational reasons to believe that you excuse the propaganda, the noise, because the bottom line at your dinner tables, you feel like there's more money. And the Democrats aren't going to protect that. Now, the truth is, often markets just want stability, right? They want stability. But because Trump delivered on such a big tax cut, and there was so much money given to those higher earners, a lot of them voted for it, which is why I think the polls were so off, because people don't feel good about saying yes about that. But in the end, if the economy for 35% of the voters was why they voted, they're going to vote for Trump. And that's what happened. They sort of excused his antics or his belief system for economic reasons, because that's what America is about. It is not about a social contract for many of these people. They don't think that is going to happen, even though the majority of Americans want an improved healthcare system. So there are rational Trump voters. I'm not excusing voting for Trump, but there aren't people that are just nuts white supremacists. Yes, there are those people who fall for the media. But I'm just curious, in all of this talk about regulating social media, why we're not talking about the role of Fox News and other sort of propaganda news machines. If we would put those same laws, cable news is really a big part of the problem here. I totally agree with you. And we have to be looking at that as much as we look at Twitter and Facebook. We can't let the social media folks off though. And I think what Twitter's been doing is quite interesting, sort of marking things as not true but now we're seeing those people go over to Parler. So there'll be competition coming up in these new machines that we have to watch for.
So I agree with you. It's very difficult if we kind of pigeonhole certain voter groups and kind of drive them to the populists. And there are two questions that I'm particularly interested in, which is one is money in politics and a consumer-oriented kind of society. And looking at also voting patterns, as you said, Lisa, and campaigning. So the money issue when it comes to both. So in some way you can say the US is the birthplace of the modern consumer culture. So, and for some people, it goes hand in hand with individualism, individual rights, individual freedoms. And I dare to say, unless there will be a shift of culture, there will not be a shift of the idea of consumerism in some way, and hence not necessarily a shift when it comes to money in politics. So do you have any thoughts on that, and any thoughts on how this how this could be changed?
Well, first I have a confession to make that I've been part of the problem. I think
so
all of us have been. So no holier than thou, just on the consumerism or on the PR front. I did run for president on a reality TV show on Showtime before Trump became the first reality TV president, exactly because of this intersection of sort of entertainment and driving values. I learned more about my country. My political consultants were the ones supporting all these candidates. Now, you learn about brain science and how people are communicated. I won the New Hampshire primary and the Pennsylvania primary and the Pennsylvania primary, Allentown, Pennsylvania. So I have been part of this sort of machine to how to use communications. I was doing it to inspire girls. I lost to a conservative, but I have been part of it. I don't have a lot of hope for major election reform in the short term, but I do have hope for election reform at the local level. I don't have a lot of reform for massive culture change in the US. So I feel like I'm the outlier sometimes, am I the one who wants us all to be together when there are people who really are driving for this individual freedom? It's interesting, Wolfgang, when you say freedom, I begin to recoil as an American, because freedom in the American setting now means guns and not wearing masks. And it used to mean things like free press and freedom of speech, but freedom of speech in the United States has been equated to money, which is why we just spent record-breaking, $10 billion on a campaign, on a presidential campaign, 1 billion of that on TV, not counting 2 billionaires. So let me give you some bright spots where I see hope, okay? One, young people, changing demographics, more diverse versus ever. Young people care about climate at very high rates. They're gonna inherit this. So I see movements of young people, solidarity around Black Lives Matters. I see positive things coming from young people, which is why I'm spending all my time trying to get young people across parties elected and into governments. That's a really positive thing. The other is at the local level. My city is from Seattle. I grew up in Seattle. We had something called democracy vouchers. I think you heard me say before, 0.25% or 0.025%, very, very small amount, give more than $200 to campaigns. Now, the Supreme Court said money and speech are the same thing. So unwinding that is a bit, but how do you empower people to feel like they're quote unquote investing in democracy, which is kind of makes me sour, but it is what it is in the US case. We did something called democracy vouchers. So every voter could get vouchers to give to candidates to diversify the type of candidates that get in. You remember what I said before, that in American politics, people who give money tend to be on the extremes, right? Because they're fired up to move their agenda. Andrew Yang put this forward as an idea of doing democracy vouchers at the local level. So I see big change happening locally. I see change. We have proportional representation coming in at the local level. So if you want to look for hope, One, I think you can look at, I'm apolitical in my company, but I think Biden is going to bring us some hope in trying to bring the country together. I think it's going to be tough, but I think he's talking about the soul of America. But if you look at the state and city or county level, there's real reform happening across the country, and that's something to look forward to.
And Wolfgang, it would be great if you could comment on the rise of populism in general, and maybe also particularly in the US. Sebastian is actually asking online about the US becoming an authoritarian regime with only two parties, and there being a lot of polarization.
Well, yeah, the US are at the moment not becoming an authoritarian regime. Because checks and balances are still in place. They work, they function at the moment still. So everything's okay-ish, let's say, because there is constitutional courts, there is still elections that can lead to significant change, and democracy means that you can have a transition of government peaceful transition of government through elections. And this is just about to happen, hopefully, but it looks like it, right? So
there's rumors of shenanigans at the electoral college level, but let's just hope.
Yeah, let's just hope. What I see, and have to pick up a point that you just raised, is the role of like the moderates of the Republicans, of the conservatives, perhaps, as we would put it in like German context, because they decide. It's upon the conservatives, like the moderate Trump voters, if you will, to decide if the extremists win. Because the extremists that I call like authoritarianists, racists, chauvinists, they are too small. They are still significant, but they alone are a minority. But if the moderates tolerate them or even cooperate with them, then they win. There is a book called How Democracies Die, and the researchers did exactly that. They studied how democracies die. And democracies die when the conservatives bring the extremists into power. It's not the extremists themselves who just gain the power somehow magically. It's the conservatives who bring the extremists into power because they underestimate them, or because they want to collaborate with them for their own gains. And if that's the case, then I actually fear that there is going to be an authoritarian regime, be it in the US or elsewhere. And we are seeing this populist rise in many countries at the moment, be it Brazil, be it also still healthy democracies like Germany, be it also some Eastern European countries, be it also some examples like the Brexit campaign, which was also funded by certain anti-migration groups and based on disinformation, also using social media, but based on a narrative that has been there for decades, that the European Union is the opponent or the enemy even of the United Kingdom, right? Like the proud United Kingdom, and then there is Brussels regulating this little island in the Northern Sea. So there is a rise of populism in many countries now that is.
Let me bring this back to the US in particular, and just to ask you both on kind of the divide that exists. Some conservative commentators use the terminology radical left. You're using the terminology radical right. And personally, I feel there is a divide within the Democratic Party, more progressive congressmen and women are calling for greater attention to bottom-up progressive issues, and then some more maybe mainstream, more center-left, moderate Democrats feel they should build bridges to Republicans. So how do you feel, how can this polarization within the Democratic Party, more so I would say, compared with the Republican Party, be overcome? And how can Biden build bridges between the Democrats and the Republicans? And this especially having in mind that bridge builders such as the late Senator McCain seem to be missing on the Republican side, and maybe to some extent also on the Democratic side.
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. I mean, just to bridge from the PR and propaganda to this answer, I cannot tell you how important it is in the American context for charismatic candidates. Obama rose from nothing because he was smart and charismatic. AOC, won her race. She's massively charismatic. The American system requires charismatic, telegenic people to do better. It really, really does. It's one of the reasons why Trump did so well. He's massively—
That's Ocasio-Cortez you're referring to.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, they do quite well, and they can hold the attention of people. I hope that Germany doesn't go that way. I like that the Tagesschau is one of the most boring things I've ever seen, because it's about the policies and not about the people. So I get worried about the Americanization of politics anywhere else, because it gets to be game show-like. Again, confession of a former reality TV star. I think if I'm Biden, it's a very difficult play if the Democrats win the Senate, because there's be massive pressure for a progressive agenda. Building bridges right now with the Republicans is going to be quite hard. You have to remember Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, after having a lot of money thrown in, both won their re-elections. And remember, Republicans won down ballot. So I feel like the Republicans are very emboldened going in, and they're going to hold very, very tight to their party over country, perhaps. I don't know, or just holding on to their values, as they would say. So I think it's quite hard. I think the glimmer of hope I have is that number one, Biden has been in the Senate, and he knows a lot of these people personally. He's personal friends. He's gone through personal tragedy with them. He's bonded with folks like McConnell, different parties, but I'm hoping that in that there can be some middle ground as human beings done. And Biden's a really good negotiator. If you haven't read any of his biographies, he's quite a good negotiator. He looks for the win-win, not so much that other presidents have. The presidents are looking for, hey, I've made it all easy for you, now do it. He looks for the win-win. His mother said to him, this holds to him as a child, you are no better than anyone, or you are no worse. So he looks at people as people. So he's got really good skills, and Kamala Harris, I think, has very good skills. We'll see how she does. But I think holding that coalition together has always been hard in the Democratic Party, right? There's lots of movements. This is the first time transgender has ever been used in an acceptance speech. So he's got a lot of work ahead. But during the primaries, and I'll turn it to you, Wolfgang, during the primaries, there were a lot of angry Bernie voters from the election, from the Democratic election to this. Biden has been brilliant in his team of bringing those Bernie people and talking to them and engaging them. We'll see if Bernie gets a cabinet position. It'll be quite polarizing either way. If he does or doesn't, he'll be thoughtful with his cabinet positions if he can get them through. So he's aware of this, and if anyone can negotiate it, I think he can.
So a rather positive outlook on Joe Biden being a bridge builder.
Yeah, I do. He's got the skills.
Yeah, exactly. This was my glimmer of hope when I looked at this election before, because now the Democrats were united behind Joe Biden. I'm not sure necessarily if it was because of Joe Biden. It was probably because of Donald Trump and just trying to fight Donald Trump as a person, as a president, and just hinder him from a second presidency. But now that Democrats are being united is important, because otherwise they can't win the battle. If now the Democratic spectrum gets split up, then they will lose the war against the enemies of freedom. So it's very important for President Biden or anyone else who's sharing the Democrats to unite those different groups, and of course also making compromises with Republicans, because he has to in the Senate to push through any policies. Have to. So it's probably important to say what you really want, and then after you said what you really want, what you stand for, After that, you can come in with realpolitik and say, okay, but we have to make compromises because we don't have the majorities, at least not in the Senate, at least not for now. So we have to agree upon a compromise with the other side.
Yeah, but compromise these days in politics is a dirty word. And I understand sort of what's that line, but this is what's interesting.
It is, but it's the only way forward.
Yeah, I'm doing a deep review. If anyone's online sort of knows anything about this, really asking some questions, because I'm about to move over to be the CEO of our foundation, which is about political training. I started my first political training institute 25 years ago with colleagues, and we do work sort of asking, what does a 21st or 22nd century politician need to look like? What's different than what, you know, Plato or Max Weber, who said it's a calling and a profession? What's different now about being a politician than's ever been before? And for a very long time, compromise was a very important attribute. And in American politics, not so much, because you guys have a parliamentary system where compromise is built into the coalition, right, from the very beginning. That's not built into our system. We have a winner takes all. You win the electoral college, you win, you drive forward. We do have these checks and balances. Yeah. So I'm really interested if anyone out there wants to go on this journey of deeply asking, what are the new skills and mindsets you need in this global world with technology? And I will say, I think one of the reasons why people's minds are hurt, pain right now, I think why we see the rise of the AfD in Germany, why we see the rise of populism in Brazil, why America is, we're going through massive shift with technology. Something like 50% of the jobs that exist now won't exist in the next 20 to 30 years. This is scary, right? Yuval Harari talks about, you know, what is the Homo Deus? What does the future look like? How technology and our bodies will come together. We don't hear hardly any politicians right now. And I don't blame them, because I think we're in the middle of a humanity creative process to figure out where do we want to go. There's no forward-looking narrative. It's a defensive narrative. Defensive narratives are winning right now. And we have the opportunity, this is why I'm really betting on young people, to come up with what is that narrative for a new world that we want, that lives with climate change, that lives with mass migration, that lives with globalization, that lives with making decisions about, will technology rule us or will we rule technology? We have to be listening and co-creating across borders. Yeah. And that takes a different type of politician. That's exciting. We have to do that.
But what is Biden's slogan? Build back better.
Yeah.
So why build back? So back to the future. I think this is not a convincing narrative. And that's why I agree very much with you saying, okay, what is the narrative? What is the story for politics or politicians of the 21st century? And with young people coming in, with the Generation Z coming in, or with the millennials now getting into power, the entire story will change when the old generation passes away and makes space for new people, for younger people moving in, because they are different. And you said it before, that the young generation is more diverse than it used to be. And also the white people among the new young generation is different, is more liberal, is more progressive somehow. Yeah. At least it's a tricky part, but it's still progressive and different, at least, than the elder generation used to be. And this, if they feel the burden, so to speak, or not, this will change the path of how democracy is built and what policies are being striven for.
And we're sitting here in the Arts and Social Club. If I could just quote Ray Bradbury, who's one of my favorite science fiction writers. Roughly, it's that human beings have always started off with a romance and it's ended up with reality. And I think we are pained right now. We're kind of saying, the progressives say, the Titanic is sinking, stop the Titanic from sinking, instead of what sort of world do we want to fall in love with? How do we create that world? And I think if we keep talking about all the problems, we have them, instead of focusing on where's the romance? You know, where do we get to fall in love with the sort of humanity we want while we're mitigating for climate change? If we just keep talking about how bad things are, we get a pretty crappy romance.
I couldn't agree more, because I think we do need these positive visions in order to start dreaming again what the world could be like, rather than focusing on negative aspects only. And let me come back to that in a moment, actually, but not least because we are in Germany here, and Germany being the strongest economy in Europe and the fourth largest worldwide. Let me just talk about the international lens of US politics. And my colleague at the Arts and Nature Social Club, Esther, is particularly interested in also, Biden's track record when it comes to both an international outlook, including kind of the military aspect, the military dominance of the United States in the world. And Biden was behind the second Iraq invasion. And so can we also expect more kind of a stronger military stance in different countries abroad? What about areas of conflict, including Yemen and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Iran, etc. I think I'm not expecting you to go into detail too much, but why don't you talk a little bit, Lisa, on kind of the international outlook and what the Biden administration would be prepared to do, both on the negative side and on the positive side, especially the latter.
Well, then we can talk about the German government and Europeans' contributions and readiness in NATO and beyond. That would be a fun conversation. I am no foreign policy expert. What I'll tell you is the politics of what's going on right now that is known and public. I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but the news on the street or in Capitol Hill or in the administration is right now, or the transition. The Iraq War was a painful thing for America. 9/11 was, I cannot tell you how much that changed everything about who we are as people. I think a big change started with Reagan, but 9/11 was a punctuation around American life and American military, and obviously some hawkish behavior in Iraq. A lot of people who voted for that war regret that now. But the other thing that happened along the way is we had mass genocides happen that weren't stopped. There were a lot of things in the world where America felt like we are the people who spread goodness and democracy. And Iraq didn't work out in any way. And there was something called Responsibility to Protect that wanted to stop mass genocides or human rights violations from happening. America's a bit conflicted, but what they're not conflicted on anymore is about hawkish behavior, I think, externally that we're seeing. And so we're even seeing within the right, within the progressive wings, real nervousness about having any defense secretary who is a hawk, who has relationships with some of the big defense contractors. So this is a big debate that's going on in America right now, what that's going to be. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but there is a discussion like I haven't heard in other administrations. We'll see.
Do you have any perspective on kind of the international dimension of a Biden administration and where the US...
No, when it comes to foreign policy in the context of military interventions. I'd rather have perhaps an opinion, let's say, not really some insights, but an opinion when it comes to climate protection, because climate protection and going back to Paris, to the agreement of Paris, was a big point in his policy platform, and will hopefully be also among his top priorities for the next 4 years, because now is a turning point for the global climate, and now we have to act. And the world without the United States fighting climate change is just rather hopeless, it's rather desperate, right? So I do hope that at least this, if no other topic, but at least this, fighting climate change, is among the few things the progressives around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others can push through, because this is a matter of survival of humankind, actually also of a positive future we can create, because it's not only what we don't want anymore, which is coal and gas and oil, it's also something we want, which is sun power, it's cities that are freed from car traffic, that is new technologies coming in. So changing the way we farm our foods is changing the way we travel, and it's going to be a better future, I'm very much convinced of. But the way to the status quo, to this new status quo, is going to be perhaps a bit hazardous and at least challenging for many people, because it also puts jobs at risk while it creates new jobs. So there is going to be winners and losers, and this is a dramatic conflict also in society. And there needs to be someone or actually many people, not only one, but many, who push that issue forward and try to take care for a common way into that new future, so we don't lose people on the way.
Can I make an insider? Just
I know. Sorry, it was a big topic change now from protecting.
No, obviously the climate topic and environmental topic is one that I wanted to touch upon in more detail anyway. So thanks for moving on to that topic, which is also has obviously international.
You only got 1 hour eventually, anyways.
I thought you were going to go to cybersecurity, which is a whole other interesting thing.
That's
I'd love to hear
another
more
big thing
from you about, because wars are just fought in very different ways now, right? So the whole idea. But on climate, I just think it's really important to understand. I think people do, but there's the political battles that happen, but a lot of the even legislation that is passed or other rules and regs from executive order in the United States and in many countries are then turned over to rank and file career public servants who do the implementation of that. And it's often in the cascading down of that implementation where in the US, the people who follow the points along the way tend to be lobbyists from oil and gas and coal, who can very much influence the system after the legislation is passed. So it's really important that you not just watch the political commitments, but even if you do get a political commitment, down the aisle you need, or down the chain of command, you need really well prepared, you need a fair system. And there's a book out called Short Circuited of a professor who's written about sort of the whole climate policy, and she has great insights on what could happen in this administration. She'll probably go into the administration, I'm forgetting her name, but Short Circuit is like the insider if you really want to know what's going on. If you care about climate, you've got to watch what's going on, the sausage making, as we say in the United States, and climate change. And I just, Jörg, you and I have talked about education. My company, Apolitical, we're really dedicated to helping public servants around the world learn those 21st century skills about how to actually do this work. So we're working with some governments on how to help public servants learn about climate financing. Because if you're a public servant, you don't necessarily know about climate financing. You might know public administration. So I think we can't forget in all of this policy stuff, the largest workforce in the world, 200 million people, are people employed by government to implement those policies. And we have to, you're in government now, there are great people in government. People think of them as gray blob bureaucrats. I'm a former public servant ourselves. Democracy will wilt if the citizens don't engage regularly, not just at elections. We don't have responsible, great politicians, which we need a whole new generation of them. We don't have great public servants in that whole democracy flywheel. So I just want to talk about that.
And a lot of public servants actually left during when Trump was elected 4 years ago.
Yep. Yeah, it was very much hollowed out, and he pushed an executive order through that basically would make many more of them political appointees. We have 4,000 jobs are turning over in the federal government right now.
And ironically, he put people in charge, for example, at the EPA, who were known to be kind of not necessarily friends of, in that case, environmental protection and renewable energy. So there's actually one question from the audience to you, Lisa, asking about Biden maybe drawing on people such as Al Gore for climate policy or climate change agenda, and even Obama, former president, on kind of to help with healthcare, the Obamacare. Do you think Biden might actually bring either of them back into the fold?
I think there are so many great people in the U.S. could help Biden. Those people are obviously awesome people. I kind of want less politicalization of this stuff, though. They're quite polarizing. Gore has been quite a hero. I mean, I sat next to him during one of the creations of the PowerPoints, but there's lots of other people that they could be working with on climate legislation. Maybe he will, I don't know.
Yeah. Any thoughts on those topics, climate? You touched upon climate, health, or education, and
I mean, again, on this point, perhaps there are so many people around, as you said, who are experts on climate change and climate protection, or on new energy. So why bring the old people back in? Why not bring young people in? Because they know, and they know perhaps even better.
Although one can say that it comes more kind of from kind of an idealistic or emotional reaction from young people, because they inherently know that something is kind of off in some ways.
Yeah, they know, and it's their future, and this is why they care.
Exactly. So maybe you can touch upon that a little bit in a bit more detail based on your own work when it comes to intergenerational justice. You've written books on this topic, and some call you in Germany the spokesperson on behalf of the next or the young generation.
Well, I'm not young anymore, so other people have taken the job, but I still try to be like a sort of an advocate of the young, because I think they need also the elderly, which I might kind of grow into, to be like their advocates, because they alone, they will not make it, because young people are minority in Western democracies, right? So if young people only voted in the US elections, then Biden would have indeed won by a landslide, because the young were the age group that voted dramatically in the majority for Biden, even in the previous elections. Or let's also recall the primaries of the elections in 2016, Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders. In some states, there was a clear correlation even between the age group and the candidate they voted for. And the older the person gets among the Democratic followership, the more likely it was to vote for Clinton. And the younger the person was, the more likely it was to vote for Bernie Sanders. So there's a clear correlation very often between your age, independent from your ethnic background, or the color of your skin, or even your economic background, and your policy preferences. And this happens for many issues and candidates around the world in many countries, because young people often have different values, they have different interests, they have just different situations of life where they live in. And that's okay, because like it's just natural and normal to have different interests in a society. There is the old, there is the young, there is the women, there is the men, and they have to agree upon something, right? That's called democracy and the wheeling of dealing of our system. The only issue is that the young in most Western countries, actually all of them, they become less and less. It's a minority, while the older generation, they become bigger. So for instance, I know the numbers for Germany. Half of the members of the governing parties right now, of CDU, CSU, and SPD, is older than 60 years. Half of them. And every voter, like every third voter, is older than 60 years. And that does something to democracy. Democracy shapes democracy in that way. And I'm like, in almost every week, there is something where I see, okay, this is something where no one talked to younger people, where no one cared for younger people, where they only had the interest of the old industries in mind, but they didn't care about climate change too much. They didn't care about education. They didn't care about digitalization and so forth. So they're giving...
They don't care, they just don't know.
They don't, well, they might know, they might even care. So I was a bit like too far going perhaps, but what is deciding then upon the priorities? Do you do A or do you do B with your time and money you spend? And then you rather go for the interests of the existing industries that you want to save because they have jobs. You don't think about, or you don't care so much about the potential future industries that still are about to create jobs in the future. If your voters are old, then you care about old people. You don't care about the young people so much because it's not your electorate. If I talk to politicians from the Conservatives saying, hey, why don't you lower the voting age from 18 to 16? I say, well, they don't elect me. They vote for the others. So do I want to commit political suicide? No. So I'm not in favor of that. So every policymaker has, of course, also a genuine policy agenda, maybe even a good one. Maybe he's progressive, maybe he's forward thinking, or she. But eventually, she or he has to be reelected, and then she or he has to think, and this is in our system, and this is actually a good thing, to think of her or his voters. But the problem is, when the younger generation either has no right to vote because they are too young, they go on the streets, they organize a global youth movement, they found companies and so forth, but they don't have the right to vote. or they are not enough. Like in Brexit, for instance, there were just not enough young people to vote against Brexit. And then the old people decide about the future of the young people. And this is what I criticize, and this is what we have to talk about in the future, because how should we make our society future-proof if the young don't have a voice?
Yes, but the young also then have to get involved. I mean, it's less than 2% of young people want to go into political parties. So there's like 3 ways around that. One, you make the political parties more friendly to young people, which is something we've been working on for a very long time, because they don't know, so to make them more friendly. 2, you encourage people to like get in and change it from the inside out, which is not easy, but what is easy that's worth doing? Like everything is hard.
I think 2% is a fantastic quota, actually.
That want to go into political parties.
Yes.
And then they have to vote, right? Then they have to vote. And you saw this in the last election when Fridays for the Future, lots of young people came out and you saw a surge and a reflection of their policies. So,
and this has influenced European elections.
Massively influenced. So there is, this is the thing. Like I said, we see it as a democracy flywheel. The citizens are at the bottom. The politicians are here, informed by the citizens, who then inform the career public servants. And that's democracy is a means and not an end. It's a means to a better life. And I think a lot of people think, oh, democracy is an ends. No, the ends isn't voting. You vote so that there's an agenda that gets put forward and implemented effectively. If you don't have good government, it's not implemented effectively, so that we live the sort of life that we want. But first you have to ask yourselves, what sort of life do we want? How inclusive do we want to be with that life? And I don't think we have those kind of first principle conversations enough. In America, we're so distracted by the Hollywood game, again, confessions of a reality TV star, that we forget to ask the fundamental question, do we want a society that cares with one another? Am I willing to suspend my right to not wear a mask so I don't, infect someone else? These first principle conversations we have, and citizens have a responsibility to do democracy daily. This is not an electoral thing. It's about listening to the news, right? It's about following politics. It's about running for office at the local level.
It's more than voting, yeah.
It's more than voting, and it will slip away if we don't have more citizen engagement. When I was a kid growing up, there was a song, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. We learned all about civics. Civics in the United States, I don't know as much in Germany, are way down. So if we want democracy to work, we can't just wait for the elections. We can't just do electoral reform. It's got to start really young. We've got to be committed to it and get more young people elected. And I'm working on that. I run something called the Apolitical Academy. I'd love to start one in Germany. We have one in Southern Africa, one in Sweden. These are non or multi-partisan political training academies to get those kids who like to be activists or academics that want to get into politics, but don't know the right people. You're right. Like you have to know how to navigate the system, right? They have to have networks. We're looking to start one in the Caucasus and in Paraguay and the UK. I'd love to start one in Germany or other places. It's buy-in for younger people to get engaged earlier. We shouldn't wait till we're 60 to get involved in politics. We can get involved now. Or would you run for office?
Not for now, but there is many other ways that that can contribute to society.
There's no doubt about that.
Right?
But if
so,
everybody
for instance, like Fridays for
that,
Future, they have often been asked, so why don't you run for parliament? And they say, well, we just, we created a global movement that has influenced politics. And now you're asking me for running for parliament. Why? Because we have impact already as a movement, which is also democratic engagement.
I'm not
saying, so there is so many ways around that.
I'm not saying it's the only way, but if people
we
don't
need,
get
we need
in,
both. We need both.
We need both.
We need also more education. Of course, education is always good. Yeah, and training people and teaching people. And there is Plan for the Planet Academy. There is the Fridays for Future Academy that is doing this already. And if a political academy
are they training them to run for office?
Also, yeah. Then there is a national initiative in Germany. It's called Joint Politics. They are helping young people run for office with their networks, with money even, with
political entrepreneurship,
with mentoring. So this is amazing, and there is so much happening now. And there is hundreds and hundreds of young people now in Germany running for parliament. And I hope that this parliament will change. And I hope the same is true. I'm not aware about the stats, but I hope the same is true for the US, coming back to the topic of the evening, because there is so much hope on younger candidates and how how activists like Emma Gonzalez, who is fighting the NRA and has more Twitter followers than the NRA, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or short AOC, is just like creating an entire community on Instagram and on Twitter and elsewhere. It's fantastic to see what happens when young people, with their idealism and with their brilliant ideas and with their smartness, go into politics or go into activism in like the broader sense of being political. That's fantastic to observe, because there is so much hope in that. There is so much positive energy, and there is so much vision behind this, a positive vision of the future. Not just saying no to a past, saying yes to a brighter future.
And I think it's not just young people. I mean, I'm 47, right? So not 60.
You're also very energetic and positive.
I'm an energetic 47-year-old, I guess. But there are a lot of people around my age now who have been around long enough that they have, either they've been entrepreneurs or they've had successful careers, and they're kind of looking around going, wow, I really want to engage. Getting them involved in political parties, getting them involved in politics, having them open their checkbooks and support folks like Join Politics to get more involved. You need capital to really move some of this stuff. And I'm seeing more and more that happen. But for me, it's not just young people. It's young people paired with middle-aged people, paired with older people who want to build that vision together. There can be a contract, yeah. That it has to work together, not just people who've been in the party for 45 years. That's good too, but we need old and young together.
So citizen engagement, kind of the bottom-up movements working together with the ruling class, so to speak, certainly very important. And when I was part of the Fulbright program, we talked a lot on citizen-to-citizen diplomacy, which, especially if international diplomacy doesn't seem to work so well, is essential in kind of keeping the bond between nations. And especially in Germany here, our foreign policy is very closely tied to American policy, not least given our history, etc. So, I mean, needless to say, as a German, you are biased in terms of US politics, and a hope for more international engagement, both on a citizen-to-citizen diplomacy level and kind of on a diplomacy level. But we are already slightly over time, so let's maybe just spend the last couple of minutes coming back to your valid point, Lisa, in terms of the role of arts and nature, maybe, or music, and how that can actually help us to develop a positive vision of the future and move into something that may be unknown and yet more positive than what we encounter all the time, maybe on the news and in conversation with friends.
Yeah, thank you for that ending question. A good friend of mine, Gemma Mortensen, is involved in something called the New Constellations. And it's basically kind of describing part of this creative process that we're in right now to together across races and ages to say, what sort of future do we want? This is a major shift in society with technology and what it's going to bring about. It's why people are holding on to the past and dreaming and being around art and painting and being in nature and all of that. You've always seen that through history, the role of art and creating new futures. And oftentimes coming out of pandemics, you will see a big rush of art and culture coming in. So if we can have that with an eye to a better world, I'm pretty positive about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, my perspective is on art in the future. I'm very curious about the combination of digital tech and art. Like, for instance, when robots are drawing your portrait, or when Roman Lipski, an artist from Kreuzberg, uses a digital muse as a sort of spark for creativity, or also the millions and billions of young people on social media, particularly thinking of TikTok now, like just expressing themselves through art and through creativity on social media. And this has like changed the entire way people, including myself, see and observe the world around them. And I think that art can have, in this regard, just mentioning those examples, a big impact of creating this positive narrative that we need to have
a romance,
something to strive for, something to fight for, to convince people to join us for the fight against the enemies of democracy and freedom.
Very nice closing words. Many thanks for taking your time to discuss.
Thank you.
And,
thanks for hosting. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for being online, being with us. And let me also share with you that our next salon happens on the 30th of November. We will have the former Minister of Education of Italy with us, and also a best-selling author, and also civil servant here in Germany, Maya Göppel. And for those of you who are not on our invitation list yet, please respond to us at info@artsandnaturesocial.club and let us know that you're interested, and we hope to see you again at some point in the future, either online if you're far away, or in person when you are here or in Berlin. So thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your evening or day if you're in another time zone.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye.